5. Complex Solutions. Thanks to our raid of those administrative buildings, we have a good set of diagrams on this underground facility, and it is their mech production site, Lieutenant. From what I've been able to sift through, it may be their only one on Tranquil. It is also lightly defended. The Jaguars counted too much on the facility staying hidden. The front entrance has been intentionally collapsed, a crude but effective shield against an assault, while the Jaguars finish some new Omni-Mechs. Epona Ree is on station at the entrance, and she thinks she might be able to blast her way through, but no promises. Since we're running out of time, I found you another way. You are actually coming in through the back with a bit of applied engineering magic. Stand by for data feed. Under the concentrated firepower of his Orion and Dominic's salvaged Puma, Connor knew the 70-ton Thor hadn't a chance. The first azure whip from Dominic's paired particle projector cannon drew a molten scar across its turret-style waist. The Orion hammered in afterward, missiles shredding the final remnants of armor on the enemy's left leg and driving through the rent over the left side to open up the Omni-Mech skeleton. Connor's autocannon chewed deeper, tearing open the ammunition bin for the Thor's SRM system, and smashing delicate warheads and propellant chambers both. Something gave way, and the entire collection of better than 100 missiles detonated with armor-shredding force. The explosion tore out the entire left side of the Omni, critically damaging the heat shield and severing control of the left arm as the fireball blossomed. The Thor's main weapon, the left-arm Gauss rifle, dropped down to hang impotently against the Omni's side. Only the cellular ammunition storage system prevented the mech's death, channeling the explosion out front and back vents rather than allow it to eat further into the torso. Small consolation, as the tremendous force argued physics onto its side and spun the Thor into a wild, staggering step that finally toppled the war machine toward its left side, and straight into Dominic's second PPC. The man-made lightning arced and crackled, drawing a snaking path from the Puma's large particle weapon to the Thor's head. The stream of hellish energy slammed through armor and ferroglass to turn the cockpit into an instant crematorium. What might have been a recoverable fall turned into a graceless plunge into death, the state-of-the-art Omni-Mech now reduced to so many tons of parts and scrap metal. 2 mobile field bases rolled into the immense cavern, the third having been lost above ground when a star of 5 Jaguar Omni-Mechs surprised the commando. Dominic lost his Shadowcat toward the end of that battle, the Omni-Mech blown to scrap, but the commando's warrior ejecting safely. If the clan warriors had worked together instead of as 5 separate warriors, they might have finished off Connor as well. Panting for the escalated heat levels in his cockpit, he surveyed the underground mining complex, the twisted and smoking ruins left of the equipment. 3 clan mechs littered the gravel-strewn ground as well. Their threat ended, he disregarded them and looked instead at the wrecked conveyor system, which Sorensen had promised they could use to gain access to the back of the factory complex. The cavern holding the factory complex couldn't be more than a few hundred meters away, but through the seamless rock wall, it might as well have been a few thousand. As if sensing his name in Connor's thoughts, the analyst spoke over the comm system. "We've picked up a weak signal from Epona Ree. She has dug partway into the factory complex and will try to rendezvous as we press forward. Her last mobile field-based vehicle will guide me back around while you head in through the steel plant." "Good to know," Connor said. "But how do we get in there if the conveyor system is smashed?" The structure normally ran 6 meters over the ground in a long bridge from steel plant ore extractor to a ramp cut from the stone wall at the actual excavation site. Sorensen had planned to have the 2 mechs walk up the ramp and onto the belt system, follow it over into the extractor, and blast through an interior wall that would allow them to exit out the other side of the steel plant. A sound plan, except that now the middle of their bridge was missing, and battle mechs were not known for their climbing ability. A spike in the background static warned of an intercepted Smoke Jaguar communication.
"It is too quiet. What are they doing? All posts, check in."
Though clarity suffered, Connor placed it as Star Commander Drevin, the on-site warrior. Sorensen had intercepted a few transmissions between this Drevin and Ratash Osis. Drevin was desperate. Desperate men were dangerous. Desperate clan warriors, he had learned, were doubly so. "I can't raise Epona," the corporal called out over the common frequency. "Too much rock in between." One of the mobile field bases began a tight 3-point turn to head back the way it had come in. "We need to get around the side of this mountain quickly, or we'll lose her." Connor shook his head. He couldn't have Sorensen panicking now.
"Calm down, Corporal. Stop that field base."
He waited until his order was carried out.
"Now think, Thomas. You've got us this far. Your first plans have been upset, so come up with something new. We're 200 meters or so from our target. Figure it out."
There had to be another way. Just because he couldn't see it was no reason Sorensen shouldn't be able to. The man was a natural-born analyst.
It's what you do best. Do it.
Dominic paced his Puma in a tight square, working off nervous energy while the intelligence analyst puzzled a new way through. Connor waited, muscles cramping with tension. He was gambling again, and this time every second lost placed Epona Reed that much further from any support. Finally, "Can't be done, Lieutenant. I'm sorry. No way you can blast through, and your mechs are not able to make a climb like that. You need an elevator, or a ramp." "A ramp!" He allowed himself a tight smile. Sorensen might just as well have yelled, "Victory!" "You aren't 200 meters from your target, sir. You're 6 meters. We need to get you onto the conveyor bridge and into the first extractor chamber." Data scrolled over one of Connor's several auxiliary screens. "Target the following supports beneath the conveyor bridge." He didn't see what that gained them, blowing the rest of the bridge, but the corporal hadn't let him down yet. He selected for lasers only. No sense wasting precious ammunition, and if they made it through, there would be no time for a refit and resupply. Epona was counting on them being there. The ruby beams lashed out, slagging through first one heavy support, then another. The bridge twisted, and even through cockpit armor, he heard the groan of stressed metal, but did not collapse. The third and fourth support fell away, thick metal girders no match for mech weaponry. The conveyor system collapsed. Its outer structure fell flat to the ground, but where the conveyor still maintained integrity, it held up one end into an improvised ramp. A brute force job of it, but he wouldn't complain if it worked. Connor was first up the slope, praying for it to hold beneath the Orion's 75 tons. It did. He smashed his way through the preliminary crusher and into the extraction chamber. "The south wall," Sorensen reminded him. "Burn through." Lasers scored out, but where the girders had parted relatively easily, here the metal resisted. Reddish-orange splatters of molten steel dripped slowly to the floor of the extractor. This was the best industrial-grade alloy, meant to last years of regular scoring and pounding. It wouldn't give up easily. Static flared.
"They are coming. No one touches their commander. He is mine."
Drevin again. No way he had figured out their plan yet. He was referring to Epona, as if she would be leading in the combined force. She was almost through the Jaguar's barricade, and with no support nearby. He gave up on the lasers, raising his arms against the weakened metal and ramming piston-like blows against it. It cracked and bowed, but refused to give. Dominic held his place behind the Orion, unable to move up to help. Finally, Connor leaned his Leviathan machine back and then simply charged forward, lowering one angular shoulder into the damage already wrought against the wall. It held for a very long second, then parted with a shriek of tearing metal. The Orion stumbled through. Connor found himself in a tight passage meant more for exoskeleton-assisted laborers, but serviceable for mechs, if barely so. No time for finesse. He gave the Orion as much throttle as he dared. Whenever he brushed the unforgiving wall, he left behind more of his protective armor. The first indication of battle was a backflash of ruby light into the passage, coming from around the next bend. The second was Epona's call for help. "Blake's blood!" she yelled, her cultured accent softening the centuries-old curse only slightly. "I'm dancing with an annihilator up here. Anyone about to cut in?" Around the bend, the passage widened quickly into a large antechamber, opening up onto the factory complex. Roughly pentagonal in shape, the complex boasted a level of sophisticated design not yet seen on Tranquil, and never to be found in the inner sphere. As with the previous underground site, the Smoke Jaguars designed it to keep the floor as open as possible. The factory buildings had been built up the wall rather than outward, turning the entire cavern into one large metal-walled chamber. A strange tower in the middle of that chamber glowed with large power conduits and ran heavy cable to 3 automated mech construction bays that occupied different corners of the facility. Nearly complete were 3 new Omni-mechs, nestled back in their cradles as machines continued to work on them. Already complete was the monstrous Annihilator, and the 2 mechs flanking it, a second Thor and an Owens. 100 tons and 12 meters tall, the Annihilator looked every gram of an assault mech. The head was formed up like a thick comb over a bullet-shaped body, which rested on massive legs. The arms spoke of lethal intent, ending in 2 large-bore autocannon barrels each. It was not a design that promoted a call for a reasonable solution. It was one which argued for unconditional surrender. Though not an Omni-mech, it was still a clan technology machine, and so followed their design theory in that it sacrificed mobility for hard-hitting firepower. And at the moment that firepower was turned against Epona Ree. In her time on Tranquil, the new mech warrior had salvaged and returned to service a clan-designed Shadowcat similar to the one Dominic had lost, except this one had been configured for 2 extended-range large lasers and a 6-pack short-range missile system. Her ruby beams speared out, but not at the Annihilator. She ignored the Titan and the damage it visited on her, targeting instead one of the smaller mechs, the 70-ton Thor. Her tactics had thrown the floor into confusion as the Thor ran around trying to avoid her rather than fire on the mech which Star Commander Drevin had chosen for his own. In the much faster Shadowcat, Epona sprinted around the large chamber, making herself a very hard target as she continued to punish the Thor and chase it in any direction that took her away from the Annihilator, delaying tactics as she waited for help, which had just arrived. Connor's first flight of missiles bracketed the Annihilator's back, blasting away armor but unable to penetrate. Though weaker than other locations, the assault mech could withstand a few solid hits before opening itself up to debilitating internal damage. The Orion's autocannon peeled away protection from the other's right leg. His lasers both concentrated their emerald energy into the left arm, unfortunately spreading the damage around rather than taking advantage of the already savaged rear armor. If the weapons barrage hadn't been enough to prove him a threat, That the Orion was nearly of a height with the Annihilator would call attention to him as the commando's leader. No Smoke Jaguar officer worth his heritage would refuse a call to battle. As the threatening mech turned to face him, he could not help the shudder which shook him. His Orion was no match for the Annihilator, and everyone in the complex knew it, especially the Jaguar mech warrior, who raised both arms to level a quartet of autocannon in his direction. Against the slow-moving Orion, there would be little chance for Star Commander Drevin to miss. The spark of tracers flared in the cavern, drawing 4 lines of destruction to the Orion where the heavy-caliber slugs tore across its chest and both arms. The 75-ton mech shook under the onslaught much as he had trembled the moment before. It stumbled backward, the commando leader fighting to keep the battle mech upright by strength of will as much as by his piloting. Failing. The Annihilator juggernaut lumbered forward with slow but deliberate strides. But stumbling backward, trying to regain control of the battered mech as well as some measure of initiative in this battle, a lesson from his academy days flashed back to Connor. The topic had been situational awareness. "It's a mech warrior's lifeline," the lecturer had promised, speaking in a shotgun sentences as if every word counted. "Some are born with it. It can be learned, true, but it can also be learned wrong, and that can kill you." Situational awareness covered a wide range of factors. More than just knowing the lay of the battlefield, holding it in your head like some oversized chessboard on which the pieces moved, though that was part of it. When Connor gambled against the pull of gravity and shifted his Orion to the right, it was because he knew the rough rock wall of the cavern was there. The battle mech slammed hard against it, and he heard the distant crunch of shattered armor as the plates over his back were crushed. It was better, however, than toppling to the ground, likely never to rise again with the Annihilator bearing down on him. The pieces themselves were also a major consideration. The advancing assault mech, the Owens, only now moving in from the other side of the tower. Dominic's Puma, from the icon flashing across his HUD, it had cleared the antechamber to come up on the Orion's left. Epona Ree's Shadowcat chasing the Thor, the Smoke Jaguar warrior running his Omni in between the Orion and Annihilator, stopping to twist back and track her advance. With his commander switching targets to the Orion, it left him free to finally answer her attacks. Though he'd never fought at her side before, he simply trusted that Epona wouldn't be there to face the Thor's assault. A slight gamble, yes, but in his mind the picture came together in such perfect form he could imagine no other result. As much as anything, situational awareness was coordinating all the factors and understanding how they related to each other, predicting the decisions of your own lancemates as well as the enemy. Recognizing that one moment when the opposition was most vulnerable, such as turning their back and disregarding a former target. The clans taught their warriors to prefer single combat above the normal chaos of a battlefield. Their warriors chose a target and attempted to bring them down to the exclusion of all else. In Connor's opinion, they had learned wrong, and it would kill them. "With me, Dominic." He barely had time for the order before tightening up on his triggers, firing not at the Annihilator, which was presenting 10 tons of fresh armor towards him, but at the Thor, already wounded by Epona's earlier assaults. His autocannon spat out a hard stream of destruction, tearing into the 70-ton mech's left arm and cutting it off just below the shoulder. The Thor's primary weapon was lost with the arm dropping away to smash against the cavern's rocky floor. A split second behind him, Dominic punched 2 PPC blasts into and through the Omni's right side. The blue-white lightning melted away a large portion of engine shielding and destroyed the control equipment of the right arm, which sagged into uselessness. As good as dead, the Thor suffered one final barrage as one of Connor's short-range missiles and both medium lasers struck at its right leg. Already savaged by Epona, the limb had less to give than the salvo demanded. The leg bowed outward at the ruined knee joint, then snapped off as the Thor fell over onto its side, not to rise again. Epona had already recognized her own advantage, splitting off from her pursuit of the Thor and slipping in behind the Annihilator, which had spurned her for the larger Orion, obviously considering her an inferior target. Determined to chastise the Jaguar warrior for his presumption, she cut loose with both large lasers and a flight from her SRM launcher. Ruby energy flared at the assault battlemech's back. One of the energy weapons drifted low, cutting into the hip instead, but the other punched through to cut at the vital equipment at the Annihilator's core. Molten shielding ran down to the floor, and then high-velocity metal spat out the rent as the assault machine's gyro tore itself into pieces. 3 missiles smashing into the ruined socket sped its demise, and the Annihilator collapsed down first to its knees, and then slowly, almost gracefully, to the floor. At once, the assault machine attempted to get its arms beneath it, to fight on despite the ruined gyro. The Jaguar warrior was not giving up. Dominic had already split off to challenge the Owens. Connor advanced with Epona to pour more firepower into the downed assault mech. It would not be allowed to regain its feet, or even a prone position from which it might fire a pair of its large-bore autocannon. Gem-colored laser light flared, carving at the fallen mech as the commando warrior struck again and again. When the Owens fell under Dominic's PPCs a moment later, the fight suddenly seemed to flee the Annihilator, which collapsed over its arms and lay silent. Connor noticed a large hole burned through the back of its head, one of Epona's large lasers finally ending the Star Commander's struggle. The 3 Damocles commando battlemechs held the floor and the factory. "Not bad work, Epona." Dominic walked his Puma over to face the Shadowcat, presumably so he could wave through his own cockpit canopy. "We could have used you topside when that Star of Omnis hit us." "Well, better late than never," he said, forgetting, conveniently, in Connor's opinion, that here it had been Epona who had arrived first. "Late?" He could hear the adrenaline rush in her voice, shaking that usually soft accent. "Pain, do you have any idea what it took to get here at all? Bloody mission cock-up, scattering us all over the peninsula." Diplomatically, Dominic retreated. "Sorry, Ree. Glad you made the party. Though all things being equal, I'd rather be seeing the Black Hammer." Epona Ree calmed, coming back into her own self-assured voice. "Every indication, including Jaguar comm intercepts I picked up, point towards its complete loss. Except for Keith Andrew, and he's still stuck up north. We're all that's left." Connor sighed to himself, then dropped his jaw down low enough to engage the contacts and open a channel. "So much for the cavalry," he transmitted. Not for the first time of late, Dominic's pessimistic view of the world was beginning to look the more clear, and with each addition to his motley force, the strains worsened rather than improved. Epona's Shadowcat shifted on mechanically taloned feet to face the larger Orion. "It gets better. Keith ran into some heavy laser towers in the northern stretch of Operations Area 3. "We're acquainted with those," Dominic interrupted. "Well, these can target ground forces as well as low-orbit ships, so don't expect much in the way of support until those are taken out." She paused for a second to let that news sink in, then, "In fact, play it safe, and don't expect much at all." "Extremely good salvage, everyone. Can't ask for much better than a clan factory."
We might ask for a working dropship.
I'm working on that, Dominic. In the meantime, Apona's earlier scouting has pointed out several good routes leading into the next operations area. With Osis close in on our position, we will do better on the move. Every step takes us that much closer to the eclipse.
You know, I don't remember signing on for the walking tour of Tranquil. But am I happy to be here? You bet I am.